Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
With yes,
Go
Mike,
ahead.
did you want to add
No,
something?
I just was agreeing with David.
Yeah. So, David, why don't you use that as the sort
Sure.
of jumping off point for your
Yeah, so
piece?
Mike has spoken about the clutter of local results, of all stripes, not just Google Business Profiles, but things like products and ad extensions and all of that sort of thing. And I recently had an engagement for David Mim that is I've had a lot of interest. David Mim Inc., my corporation
Yes.
over here on the side.
Yes.
But I've actually had two clients, one of which I didn't take on because we're so busy with the Near Media search game plan. Two clients have come to me in the last, 6 weeks asking, hey, our organic traffic has kind of eroded over the last 9 months to a year, and we'd like to hire you to kind of figure out why that is and give us some direction on, what to do. And so one of the clients I ended up taking on, I did a pretty detailed kind of competitive analysis of who's showing up in their SERP and what do their SERPs look like across, it's a nationwide company. So across multiple markets. And the thing that immediately struck me as I was doing even a dozen keyword searches across 3 markets, just as a sample, was just how cluttered the SERPs have become across the board. This is a company that I would say is not exactly an e-commerce company. They're not exactly a service business. They're somewhere in the middle. And the number of PLA carousels at the top of the page or on the right-hand sidebar on desktop, the embedded grids of products that Google is showing, the number of image carousels, the hidden gems, the video results, the visual clutter and the sort of extreme minimization of any organic presence relative to things that are standing out to eyeballs, i.e. images with structured data, as opposed to 10 blue link type results, was really, really shocking. And I would guess, I did a whole workup for them. It looks like they're doing everything the right way. They're not pushing the envelope with their on-site SEO. They don't have any bad links. And I'm just like, I think probably your click-through rate is just declining because of all of the stuff that Google is now throwing.
David charged them $10K to tell them they're fucked.
I gave them a little more constructive advice than that.
Oh, okay. Whew.
But the thing I was going to point out is just something to keep in mind. Like if you've lost organic traffic and you feel like your rankings are largely the same from all of your ranking reports, take a look at the SERP features that are showing up for the same queries that you've been tracking. And if the SERP features have either increased, or even if the volume of search features hasn't increased, has the pixels amount that those features take up increased. I think that would be a sort of big takeaway from this client. The second thing I would note is just it really plays into this bizarre product direction that Liz Reed highlighted during Google I/O of these AI organized pages, right, where they're just organizing modules. And this sort of modular way of thinking, it is totally bizarre to me. I cannot imagine that this is actually, doing these searches myself, I can't imagine if I was looking for something that this company was selling, that this is actually a good experience for me. I don't need these 6 different modes of looking for something. And organizing those things better is not going to make a more positive search experience for me. The flip side of that, just last point, Greg, and then I'll let you jump in. The flip side of that is the notion that I think Prabhakar Raghavan has put out there as a KPI for Google is volume of searches, right? And so there's this bizarre sort of contradiction of, if the search experience is just bad enough on the first term you search for, maybe you're going to do one follow-up search to try to get a slightly different set of results. And that actually plays into this company-wide KPI of increasing search volume, or at least making sure that it doesn't look like your search volume is declining for investors. And so I think that both of these things kind of play. Google's like trying to thread the needle of a quality of search being just good enough to keep people on Google, but just bad enough to keep their searches increasing, to make it look like they're not losing users.
Crap as a KPI. I'm not sure if that's brilliant
spelled K-R-A.
or a tin hat one. It's a good idea, though. It's
K-R-A-P.
and well articulated.
KRAPI. Crap. So like in July of 2022, in the newsletter, I described what you're describing as like the Las Vegas SERP, just all these flashing lights and just a cacophony of noise and, just visually kind of numbing. Um, and I mean, I think even earlier than that, we talked about how the SERP needed to sort of be more streamlined, and Google has gone sort of in the opposite direction. I mean, now they have this web results thing, right, where you can sort of click over and find just a bunch of links,
Which also is not
but it's
necessarily what
kind
I
of
want.
buried.
I
As
do
a
think
as
that images in this particular category are really helpful to sort of help me refine my query. I just don't want this sort of, as you said, cacophony of things hitting me in every direction. It's bizarre.
well, Google. I think this reflects a certain lack of confidence on Google's part, certainly lack of product direction. I mean, the paradox I think of all of this is that Google is doing all these modules in a way to respond to perceived competitive threats. Younger users defecting to social, et cetera, et cetera. And what they're doing is they're making it worse. They're causing people to defect, even as they're trying to defend against that with all these different SERP elements. It's just bizarre to me.
In this twin pack I saw in the EU, they had very close to the top a people also asked section, which was very long. And then, above that was the pack, which just below the pack, organic result, another pack. And then a people also search for result, right? So this does speak to David's idea that these SERPs have maybe been slightly degraded, and maybe one of these is really what you're looking for. We knew this all along, but here's two ways to get there, kind of. And it takes up a lot of territory. People also ask, and people also search for.
Well,
what is the difference between the two?
That's their sort of attempt to get around some of the spam that exists, is by pushing you into some more authentic user generated content. Now, people search for isn't necessarily that, but it's like, I don't know what's going on inside of Google, but it just seems. I mean, I've been using. I mean, Perplexity got spanked for doing some shady stuff, but I've been using Perplexity more and more when I want to find a thing that I already know exists. Like, give me a link that stands for this proposition or whatever. It's just simpler and faster. Here's a good enough site that stands for this proposition that I want to talk about or whatever. And to do that on Google, I mean, there's time and time again, I will search for stuff that I know exists and I can't find it, and that just to me is incredibly frustrating and reflective of the degradation of search.
So, David, back to tactics. What do you suggest for this client?
Well, my biggest suggestion was just that they needed a much more sort of multimodal view of the things they were trying to optimize. Right, they were very focused on, this particular. Not they actually, I think, understand the concept of not targeting one keyword, but sort of a bucket of terms that's related to a topic. So they already had made that. That's my first piece of advice for clients who haven't recognized that yet, is don't, you need to be tracking sort of an aggregate median of rankings and visibility and engagement for topics, not single keywords. So that's kind of the first one. And then the second one is, within those topics, like, take a look at what the SERPs look like across the board, and understand, like, oh, actually, the image carousel tends to show in the top 3, and we're probably getting a lot of engagement where we have a chance to get a lot of engagement with our awesome images. Let's make sure we're using really good alt text and surrounding those images with strong headlines and captions and all that sort of thing. So that's, just think about the presence of your existing assets in all of these different places. Another one is just like, if PLAs are showing up in your space, you probably need a Google Merchant Center feed, even if that hadn't occurred to you previously. So just look at the surfaces, look at the modules that Google is inserting into your search surfaces, and understand, like, you need to be thinking well beyond your website, depending on which of those modules Google's showing.
Which also sort of brings to mind something that Rand Fishkin was talking about on our previous podcast about zero click results and regulation. He was he sort of made the point that you kind of need to really now think well beyond Google and go to other channels to build your brand and to get kind of, some attention that then will be reflected back in Google. That's a very broad statement, but it seems intuitively correct to me.
So that statement made me go back and look at an old Local U presentation that I created, I think in 2016, about the 4 pillars of local search: consumers, community, business relationships, and media. Those are the traditional things that crafted your local brand. And those are the things that you need to be sure that you're doing well now, because it crafts your digital brand as well, and that crafts your search results. I mean, the same applies in local specifically, right? I mean, under consumers, it's word of mouth and reviews. And under community, it's like, who are you known to be associated with and support, and what, public services are you working for? And in business relationships, are you certified, licensed, acknowledged by the chamber as a legitimate organization? And in media, it's not just ads, it's articles and mentions. Right. I mean, those things that have always been there, those 4 pillars, are there now, and they just sort of get reflected back on themselves in digital and in ranking.
Miriam Ellis wrote a great column for Moz on a kind of incident involving Ace Hardware, which I won't go into. It's worth reading. We reference it in the newsletter, and it makes this point about all these sort of real world activities that then boost your online visibility and are reflected back online. And so these sort of basics that you're talking about, I think, are really increasingly important for people to pay attention to. And there's definitely a connection between the real world and, people tend to think sort of myopically about digital, but increasingly you gotta sort of do a holistic thing in order to be visible.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.